There's a guy I heard about, a hedge fund manager living in Greenwich, Connecticut, worth roughly $87 million. 3 properties, nice life, but he flies commercial. His kids attend public school. And his financial advisor told me over drinks that this man, a literal multimillionaire, spends around $19,000 per month, all in. When the advisor suggested he could increase his spending, the man shrugged and said, "Spend it on what? I already have everything I want." Meanwhile, there's a couple down in Austin with roughly $400,000 in their retirement accounts, convinced they need $15 million to retire comfortably. They're burning themselves out trying to hit some mythical target they found online. A target they've never once validated against their actual expenses. They just assume the number needs to be massive. Here's the thing. I've spent the last decade running a business, chatting with accountants, wealth managers, and tax attorneys who actually work with real rich people. Not theory, not simulation, not influencer fantasies, real balance sheets. And something jumped out at me. The psychological gap between $5 million and $50 million is gigantic, but the lifestyle gap, barely measurable. At neither level are you flying private. At neither level are you stocking supercars in a marble garage. You're mostly deciding between a good restaurant and a great one. So today I'm going to break down why most people will never need more than $5 million to live an objectively incredible life, and why the majority will need far less. We'll walk through how wealthy people actually spend money. We'll run real math on retirement spending. And we'll talk about why the finance world has a massive incentive to convince you your number needs to be bigger. Think about wealth like a ladder. The first few steps completely change your reality. Jumping from $20,000 in savings to $100,000 is life-changing. You can absorb a job loss. You can handle an emergency. You sleep better at night. Going from $100,000 to $500,000? Still a huge deal. You consider buying property, maybe starting a business. You feel stable. But here's where it gets strange. Going from $5 million to $10 million changes almost nothing in your day-to-day existence. And jumping from $10 million to $50 million doesn't magically teleport you into some sci-fi luxury class. You're eating at the same types of restaurants. You're wearing the same clothes. You're not suddenly hopping on private jets. You weren't doing that at $5 million anyway. The ladder doesn't end at $5 million. The rungs just stop meaning anything. Let me show you why I believe that. There was a small survey of around 150 entrepreneurs and founders across multiple net worth bands. Small sample size, sure. But the spending patterns were fascinating. Households with under $1 million net worth burned around $9,500 a month. That's around $114,000 a year. Comfortable, not wild. Net worth households between $1 million and $5 million, and even those between $5 million and $10 million, spent roughly $15,000 per month. That's $180,000 per year. Higher-end lifestyles, vacations, nice cars. But here's the twist. Households with $10 million to $20 million and even up to $50 million, their median spend hovered around $25,000 a month, about $300,000 a year. Read that again. People worth $20 million spend around $300,000 per year, not $3 million. Not $1 million, $300,000. These aren't yacht-buying, private jet-hopping billionaires. They're just regular wealthy people living very nice versions of normal lives. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but what if I want to spend $300,000 a year? How big does the portfolio need to be? Let's build a realistic model. Say you're a couple at full retirement age. You both hit the maximum Social Security contributions throughout your careers. One spouse pulls $4,000 a month. The other gets $2,000. That's $72,000 a year before touching your investments. Your goal is to spend $300,000 a year after taxes. Ambitious? Absolutely. But it's doable. At that income level, assume an effective tax rate of roughly 35%. So, to net $300,000 after tax, you need around $460,000 in gross income. Social Security already provides $72,000. Your portfolio needs to produce the remaining $388,000. Using a 4.7% withdrawal rate, which is near the upper bound of what most research considers sustainable, your required portfolio is roughly $8.3 million. Let me emphasize this. That's basically the ceiling. That's the highest reasonable number required to fund a top 1% retirement lifestyle, and it's still not $10 million. It's not $15 million, it's $8.3 million. And that assumes you're living like an ultra-comfort retiree. But here's where most people actually fall. Let's look at households with $1 million to $10 million net worth. These are high earners. They make roughly $325,000 to $350,000 a year. They're wealthy by any definition, and they're spending around $180,000 annually. Run the numbers. Same couple, same Social Security, $72,000. They want to spend $180,000 after tax. At a 30% effective tax rate, they need about $260,000 gross. Social Security covers $72,000. Portfolio must generate $188,000. At a 4.7% withdrawal rate, that's a $4 million portfolio. $4 million, not 10, not 20. $4 million lets you retire wealthy if you planned correctly. Now I can already hear someone saying, okay, but I live in New York/San Francisco/some expensive city. $4 million isn't enough. Except it probably is. Because the dataset includes people in high cost of living metros. These weren't rural retirees. They were business owners in real cities, and the $4.5 million range still covered their lifestyles. Here's a story that really drove this home for me. A financial advisor in Manhattan had a client who spent 30 years grinding in private equity. His target net worth was always $10 million. That's $72,000 a year before touching your investments. Your goal is to spend $300,000 a year after taxes. Ambitious? Absolutely. But it's doable. At that income level, assume an effective tax rate of roughly 35%. So, to net $300,000 after tax, you need around $460,000 in gross income. Social Security already provides $72,000. Your portfolio needs to produce the remaining $388,000. Using a 4.7% withdrawal rate, which is near the upper bound of what most research considers sustainable, your required portfolio is roughly $8.3 million. Let me emphasize this. That's basically the ceiling. That's the highest reasonable number required to fund a top 1% retirement lifestyle. And it's still not $10 million. It's not $15 million, it's $8.3 million. And that assumes you're living like an ultra-comfort retiree. But here's where most people actually fall. Let's look at households with $1 million to $10 million net worth. These are high earners. They make roughly $325,000 to $350,000 a year. They're wealthy by any definition, and they're spending around $180,000 annually. Run the numbers. Same couple, same Social Security, $72,000. They want to spend $180,000 after tax. At a 30% effective tax rate, they need about $260,000 gross. Social Security covers $72,000. Portfolio must generate $188,000. At a 4.7% withdrawal rate, that's a $4 million portfolio. $4 million, not 10, not 20. $4 million lets you retire wealthy if you planned correctly. Now I can already hear someone saying, okay, but I live in New York/San Francisco/some expensive city. $4 million isn't enough. Except it probably is. Because the dataset includes people in high cost of living metros. These weren't rural retirees. They were business owners in real cities, and the $4.5 million range still covered their lifestyles. Here's a story that really drove this home for me. A financial advisor in Manhattan had a client who spent 30 years grinding in private equity. His target net worth was always $10 million. He reached $5.6 million and abruptly said, "I want to retire early." She ran the numbers and confirmed he'd be totally fine. Then he asked, "If I work another 5 years, can I afford to fly private everywhere?" She calculated and said, "No. You'd need to triple your net worth, and even then it wouldn't be sustainable." So he retired. He realized that the extra 5 years wouldn't change his actual life in any meaningful way. That's the ladder again. Past a certain point, the rungs stop mattering. Most people never ask themselves where that point is. They just keep climbing because someone told them they should. Now, let's introduce another layer. What if you don't want to retire at full Social Security age? What if you want to retire 10 years early, say 55 or 57? Most people assume that makes the number explode. It doesn't. If you understand how to structure it, let's keep the $180,000 spending example. That's $260,000 gross with taxes included. You cover the first 10 years using only your portfolio. Then Social Security kicks in and takes a huge bite out of the need. Those 10 years are funded by what I call a bridge portfolio. Its only job is to cover spending until Social Security starts. Because it has a defined 10-year end date, you can safely withdraw more aggressively. Research suggests 8 to 10% withdrawal rates are reasonable over 10-year periods. Split the difference, 9%. To pull $260,000 per year for 10 years at a 9% draw, you need around $2.9 million in the bridge fund. That covers early retirement. Now Social Security begins, $72,000, and your remaining spending need drops to $188,000. We apply a declining spending assumption because real retirees spend less as they age. Travel decreases, dining decreases, life shrinks a bit. So, using a 6% starting withdrawal rate with a 1% decline in spending per year, you need about $3.1 million in the long-term portfolio. But you don't need $3.1 million on day one. You need it in 10 years. If that portfolio grows at 5 to 7% while untouched, you might only need $1.60, $1.9 million to start. Add up. Bridge fund, $2.9 million. Long-term fund, $1.60 to $1.9 million. Total, $4.50, $4.8 million. Round it up, $5 million. $5 million lets you retire 10 years early and live like the top few percent of retirees. Not private jets, not mega yachts, but legitimately wealthy by any reasonable standard. Now here's the part that always cracks me up. Go online and you'll see people claiming you need $15 million minimum to retire in a big city. Or that $10 million is middle class. And every single one of those people benefits from you believing that. If you're a financial advisor charging 1% of assets, do you want your clients to have $4 million or $14 million? If you're a finance influencer selling wealth courses, do you want to tell people they need less money or more? Which story keeps them scared? Which story keeps them engaged? A fiscal lawyer in Chicago summed it up perfectly. Tom, the entire industry runs on fear. If people ever realized how little they actually need to be happy, half of us would be out of work. He was joking, kind of. Behavioral economics has a concept for this. Moving goalposts. People hit their financial target, then immediately invent a bigger one. Enough isn't mathematical, it's psychological. I've seen people with $3 million convinced they need $8 million, then they hit $8 million and decide they need $15 million. The number stops relating to reality, it becomes a coping mechanism. Let's make it concrete with a quick case study. Picture a 45-year-old married couple earning around $200,000 combined. They've saved $1.2 million across retirement accounts. They want to retire at 55. They spend $120,000 a year. Comfortable, not extravagant. They assume retirement spending might bump to $140,000. They have 10 years to invest. At 7% returns and continued contributions, they end up with around $3.4 million at 55. They need $140,000 for 10 years. At a 9% withdrawal, the bridge requires about $1.56 million. The remaining $1.84 million grows untouched for a decade and turns into around $3.6 million by age 65. Social Security gives them roughly $50,000. Their portfolio only needs to generate $90,000. They don't need to grind to 65. They don't need $7 million. They just need a plan. Now, 2 reality checks. Reality check number 1. The sudden millionaire. Someone inherits $10 million, sees the withdrawal math, assumes they can pull $400,000 forever, then 6 months later they're buying toys, upgrading houses, and burning through everything. Lifestyle inflation is brutal. Everyone underestimates it. Reality check number 2, Social Security matters. A lot. In that earlier $4 million retirement scenario, Social Security provided $72,000. Remove that, and suddenly you need around $5.5 million instead. That's a massive difference. Now, here's where I'm supposed to say something inspiring like, find your enough and pursue purpose, but honestly, the real message is darker. Most people will never do the math. They'll chase a giant number because giant numbers feel safe. They'll work longer than they need to because calculating reality is uncomfortable. And the industry will cheer them on because anxiety is profitable. I'm not saying everyone should retire at 55 with $4 million. I'm saying people should actually figure out what they spend, what they want, and reverse engineer the number. Maybe your number is $2 million. Maybe it's $7 million. But at least it will be yours, based on a real life instead of a random internet metric. So here are 3 practical takeaways. First, track your real spending for 6 months. Not what you think you spend, what you actually burn. Most people are off by 30–40%. Second, incorporate Social Security correctly. Check your earnings statement. It probably matters more than you think. Third, use a declining spending model instead of a flat one. People in their 70s don't spend like they're 60. People in their 80s spend even less. The people I've seen retire early and stay retired all share one trait. They stopped optimizing for the biggest number and started optimizing for enough. They figured out their ladder only needed so many rungs, and then they stopped climbing. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto hype ever did. But knowing when to stop building fortune, that's the part no one teaches. Most people watching this will ignore everything I just said and chase the bigger number anyway. And that's fine. At least now, you know. If you made it all the way here, there's already one thing we can say about you. You're definitely not like most people. Most people quit halfway. Most people get distracted. Most people jump from video to video without finishing anything. The ones who stay until the end are the ones who take information seriously. And those people usually build much better lives than everyone else. So since you're in that group, let me ask you for a favor that makes an insane difference for the channel and costs you absolutely nothing. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It sounds like a silly detail, I know, but for the algorithm, it's basically pure adrenaline. This channel only grows if the people who actually think step up. And if you're still here, yes, I'm talking to you. But that's not all. This channel exists with a specific purpose. Talking about investing, money, behavior, and financial futures in a different way, without formulaic scripts or selling fantasies. Here we talk about how people actually spend, how they actually build wealth, what actually works, and how psychology destroys more portfolios than any crisis ever did. So I want to ask you a serious question. What kind of content do you want to see here? Comments are not just a social feature for me. They're literally a navigation map. They show me what you're thinking, where you're confused, where you want to go deeper, and especially where the financial industry is misleading you. Yes, misleading. There are a lot of people in this space who profit from fear, and we're here to dismantle that. Do you want videos about early retirement, investing internationally, the psychology of money, portfolio strategy, financial independence on a reasonable income, the most common beginner mistakes, the mindset of people who actually get rich, real-world case studies of families and profiles? Or maybe more counterintuitive topics like why many rich people have less than you imagine? Why $1 million means nothing in some contexts and everything in others? How to calculate your enough number instead of chasing infinity? How wealth and happiness connect and where they don't? I want to know. Drop a comment below. Speaking of money, what do you want to see here? And don't be embarrassed. There are no dumb questions here. What we actually have is a lot of people dying financially and emotionally because they never asked anything. And here's something else that matters. Share this video with someone. Everyone has that friend who is panicking about finances, that relative who thinks they need $20 million to live, or that person who would be so much calmer if they understood that money is mental before it is mathematical. Send this to them. This can change mindsets, reduce anxiety, and even change life paths. Yes, it's really that serious. And if you're the type that prefers to watch in silence without commenting or showing up, all good. I respect that. But at least hit like and subscribe because that helps me keep producing content that avoids sensationalism and gets to what really matters. Finally, let me remind you of one last thing. Money is not just numbers. It's behavior. It's story. It's fear. It's ambition. It's culture. It's psychology. Anyone who only looks at spreadsheets and ignores the human side is destined to lose to the person who understands both. Here we deal with both, and that changes the game. So take a breath and end this video with one smart, simple action. Like, subscribe, comment what you want to see, share with someone who needs it. And I'll see you in the next video.